Good evening, everybody.
Hello.
Good evening.
We are just members of the Planning Commission and City Council are just coming from another workshop session in a different Zoom format. So give us just a moment here while we join this session and get logged in. My apologies that went long. However, we're nice and warmed up for you.
In our last meeting, we sang Kumbaya. Should we try that again? Actually, nobody joined me. It was just me, and I have a terrible voice.
No one wants to hear me sing.
You do John Lennon Imagine.
I could do Yoko pretty well.
That's a challenging one.
I don't see Chair Langness yet. I'll give just a moment.
I need to go grab the paperwork for this meeting. I'll be right back.
Very good. And Karen, who are we missing from the Planning Commission? I think we've got, yeah, we're still missing a couple.
Eric.
Yeah,
Eric
Mike King.
and Mike.
Gabriel, I think you got the award for the best background there.
Thanks. I'm in Leaf First Fork, Tennessee, and on 12 acres filled with ticks. It's great.
We're waiting for, we've got Sam and Sam, Paul. We're also waiting for Kelly.
And Kathy is still, you thinking no show?
Kathy is not able, was doubtful of her internet connection tonight. Hey, Karen, can you shoot Eric Langness a message with the login for this?
Already on that.
Perfect. And I wonder, can you also send it to Kelly?
Yep, she just emailed me, so I'll send a link off to her too. Is there any, who else are we missing then?
I think Mike Keene got lost between meetings.
Okay. So I was looking for Fran Myron. Is he in the meeting? I had sent a link to Fran.
Oh, I was expecting him to be on the previous one. He's welcome to join this one. I wasn't expecting that, but.
Oh,
He comes up on the attendees list, him and
I
Gary.
do expect him. We do expect him. We've had some text exchanges
Oh,
shortly before
fantastic.
the meeting, so
Perfect.
I think he will be here.
So maybe I can send it again just in case.
I see Fran as one of the attendees
Yeah.
also. So
I just
Welcome,
moved him into
Mr. Marin.
the meeting.
I'm here
Aaron?
now. Thank you.
Here he
I'm
is.
looking for, as a guest, Aaron Parker. Is he?
Yeah.
Some reason it says Eric
You
Gallet
there?
on your name.
What?
It says Eric Gallet's under you.
Oh, it does. How'd that happen?
Oh, I have two. Oh, probably, did you share the link? Maybe?
Not intentionally.
Can you
Okay.
hear me?
Well, if it works, you can just remember I'm the one that has the white hair and
Yeah.
not that much of it.
Okay, and I was looking for Joyce, but I think there was a bounce back email that she was gone. Or is Joyce planning on being in the meeting as well?
Joyce is not going to be here tonight.
Okay. And I resent to Kelly, so I'm still.
I also have kids in the other room with duct tape over their mouth right now.
Yeah, and the dogs in the
5 of them.
other end of the
Duct
house.
tape. Mm.
Okay, we do have, you were able to resend invites out to Kelly and Eric.
Yep. I'm gonna
Okay,
email
we
again.
do have, all right, we are past our starting time here. We do have a quorum of both bodies, and so I will call our meeting to order. Welcome, everybody. Quick logistics before we start here. We do have a fairly large number of participants this evening, and so I'd like to welcome you all here. I wish we could be in person, but we will do the best we can with this Zoom format. Just a reminder that your mute button is in the bottom left tray of your screen. If you're not talking, if you want to put yourself on mute, that does help, but do please check your mute button before you start speaking. We are in workshop format this evening, so we will be more informal than we would typically be in a city council meeting. The goal for this evening is to have some great information exchanged, to get some questions out there, hopefully get some questions asked or answered, and to learn more about the project that is going to be considered. So we will keep things rather informal this evening. We'll have a presentation and then we will move into an open Q&A session. If you have questions or would like to speak, please either use the chat button, which is on the bottom of your tray, or just raise your hand on camera and we will acknowledge and keep the conversation moving. Any logistics questions before we get started this evening? Not seeing any. Our first item on the agenda this evening is the Pledge of Allegiance. I would welcome you to join us in stating the Pledge of Allegiance. If you would like to stand to do so, it's a little less awkward if you turn off your camera. You can do so in the bottom left hand of your Zoom meeting. You can stop your camera, stop video. If you'd like to rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance, staff will display a flag and I will lead us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
And to the
and
republic.
to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
Under
God,
visible,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're all.
Okay.
We did have open forum planned this evening. And Dan, are there any open forum submissions?
There are not any open forum submissions for this meeting.
There was an email
Very
that
good.
came through to city council. It was just one email from resident Jerry Buddha, address 23900 Heath Avenue, His
He
comment
did
was,
not request that to be read. I don't think he did
Okay.
not request that to be read in open forum, so I'm not sure he's intending for that to be public content.
okay,
But members of council, you do have a resident email in our email inbox that did come in. So I mentioned in our introductions, our goal tonight is to do an initial information exchange. We'll have Patrick kick us off with a kind of discussion of where we are at this point in the project, or kind of where we are from the city's perspective. We will then invite the Settled and Faith team to do a presentation, and then we will use our remaining time together for open Q&A. So let's keep this informal, and I look forward to a great information exchange. Patrick, do you just want to give us kind of an overview on where we are kind of in this project and kind of just set the groundwork? And you're on mute.
Okay. Yes, we're very early in the project. As most of you know, this project is a proposal to place, I believe, a dozen tiny homes on the church property and have homeless people reside in them and have a common area for where they can meet and take showers and eat and things like that. I'm sure we'll be getting more of an expansion of that later. We've had some very preliminary meetings with the church, with the proposers of this concept. Pete's been very involved talking to their side as well. Some of the things we have to get through is if this is something the council desires to allow, how do we get there? What do we have to do? What kind of meetings, what kind of hearings, what kind of laws have to be followed and things along those lines. So tonight is really more of an information gathering night where the council, the plan commission, and whoever else is interested should feel free and are encouraged to ask questions about the concept and what the whole concept is and how it would work and all of those things. So with that, I turn it over to those who are going to present and we'll see where we go.
Before the Settled team gets started, just quick clarification process-wise, Patrick, maybe you said it, and if you did, I missed it. There has not yet been an application submitted, is that correct?
No, there is no formal application submitted to date.
And so I know Planning Commission, you're very process-oriented and thinking about, the process changes a bit once there's an application to respond to, and so that hasn't been the case. So we are talking more in theory and more on project at large, rather than specifically to attributes of an application. And with that, we'll turn it over to the Faith and the Settled team. And if you could introduce yourselves and the members that are participating tonight, that'd be great.
All right, thank you. I'm Eric Gallitz. I'm an attorney at Stinson LLP in Minneapolis, and I represent Settled. And thank you, first of all, for inviting us to talk to you tonight. To answer the mayor's question, I'll say we are going to be asking the city to pass an ordinance. We won't get too deeply into the process tonight, and I'm sure you're going to rely on city attorney to advise you about how that works. But at this point, we understand the city needs to introduce the ordinance itself. We hope we'll have an opportunity to prepare a draft to put forward, but ultimately it'll have to be a planning commission member or a city council member who will actually move the ordinance in the first place. So we're at very preliminary stages in that regard. I will speak hopefully the least, and I'll speak first and possibly last if there's questions about legal process. But really, I just wanted to introduce the team, both for Settled Incorporated and for Faith Evangelical Lutheran Church. Gabriel Claudis is the founder and CEO of Settled, and she'll speak first about Settled's mission and the model for a sacred settlement. I'll thank Patrick for his introduction. It saves you from hearing me say what he's already said about where we've been so far, and it's nice to know you have some at least preliminary understanding of what we're asking for. Pastor John Molnar from the church will speak about how the mission of Settled fits with the church's mission and their practice. And then Aaron Parker, our architect, will present sort of the physical solution, a site plan, some illustrations of how the individual building components, both the housing unit and the common facility, will work, and how they'll look and how they'll fit on the campus with the existing church buildings. And also, I just want to acknowledge and thank Washington County Commissioner Fran Mirren for appearing. I understand the commissioner has something to say more broadly about the need for this kind of housing in Washington County. And if he doesn't mind me putting him on the spot, maybe having him talk more broadly about homelessness in Washington County would be a good place to start.
Thank you, Eric. Mayor and members, thank you for having me. And Mayor, I was able to join you at the previous meeting. I had some difficulties, so I was able to listen in, which I think sometimes is a good position for a commissioner to be in, just a position to listen. So, but I was impressed with your earlier discussion and am pleased that you're having this discussion tonight. Washington County Community Services, in partnership with our public health department, is really responsible for providing shelter and addressing the homeless needs within Washington County. I can tell you that it's been a much more difficult situation for us since COVID came about, and that is because of the heightened need in the county. And much of that is based on some of the closures of the faith-based facilities that are serving Washington County because of their inability to deal with the COVID response. Those facilities were closed, and more pressure is put on Washington County. We have been using a hotel shelter model in Washington County, and it's a very costly way to provide shelter for homeless. But that's the model that we've been using. There have been some additional funds through the CARES Act in providing funding to help shelter people and families. For those of you that aren't aware, St. Andrew's Church, in partnership with other faith communities, St. Andrew's out of Matamidi, and other faith communities, including some of the faith communities in Hugo, opened a shelter in Hugo a number of years ago on the St. John's Church site. And that has been used very well, but it has been closed down now since the beginning of COVID. And you may have an opportunity to talk to city leadership there on how that facility was approved and planned for. And I can tell you, as a resident of Hugo and having a son involved on the city council, that has been a very seamless project. It has just worked so well. I don't believe people even recognize that we're sheltering homeless at that facility, other than the ones that are involved in the church community and the individuals that are volunteering their time and serving in that capacity. So I would encourage Mayor to and the City Council and Planning Commission, as you look into this, to maybe look at the process that St. Andrews had gone through within the city of Hugo. I know your administrator and the Brian Baer, the administrator from the city of Hugo, have a good relationship, and I would encourage them to visit and provide more detailed information on that. We are within Washington County. Our long-term plans are for a single emergency shelter within Washington County, and that would be established through a partnership of our county and Community Development Authority. taking the lead. We are going to have to partner with a city within Washington County. We're going to have to engage the community in that discussion, and then there'll be a siting procedure, either in an existing facility or building a facility, but that's a long-term plan. And we are not able to meet the needs of the homeless within Washington County, and for our programs to continue as they are, we anticipate that we're only going to be able to meet about 50% of the need. And so these kinds of partnerships that you're discussing tonight, and the kind of partnership that was created with the St. Andrews Shelter within Hugo, and I mentioned that just simply, I mean, there are other shelters within Washington County, but that one happens to be in District 1, which is the area that I represent and serve. So I mentioned that, but those kinds of partnerships, particularly with our faith communities, are going to be critical in as we move ahead in addressing homelessness within Washington County. Just to give you a perspective, and many of the homeless are identified at your rest stations, particularly the rest station in Forest Lake. People are contacted there as patrols are doing their job and their work. And just since April 1st, and as you contemplate, the nicer weather coming in, and we're not dealing with the cold of winter and that type of thing. I think the numbers that were given to me were 63 people since April 1st, and those numbers continue to grow, and approximately 36 households that have been identified as homeless within the area. So, and I mentioned the rest area in Forest Lake just simply because this is a problem within Washington County, but it's also unique to your community as well, to the community of Forest Lake, because of that. So I have met with Pastor John and Ann, who is on this meeting this evening as well. Gosh, it seems like eons ago. Prior to COVID, we had coffee together and visited about their project. I attended a meeting that they had within their own church at Faith Lutheran there with Pastor John and the community that organized that. And I've just been so impressed with their recognition of the issue, their sense of responsibility in addressing it, and also, their unique understanding of the work that needs to be done. And so I appreciate that. And I'll just say it one more time. I don't believe Washington County can do this alone. We need partnerships. And I believe for many faith communities, people are recognizing this as part of their important mission of their churches. And so I'm pleased to be listening in tonight and listening further to the discussion, but certainly I hope you recognize, based on this information, the important need that exists within Washington County. And Mayor, I will offer this as well. We have people much more astute in this area than I. Community services, as I indicated, are very familiar with the issue, could talk in detail. And if you wish in the future to have a presentation on homelessness, either to the city council or a joint meeting of some sort, we would be happy to come in and do a general presentation to you on the need, on the funding sources, and our long-term plans moving forward. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated.
Thanks so much. Thank you for that, Commissioner. I'm Gabrielle Cloudis. As Eric said, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Settled. I have met with some of you, but a lot of you are new faces, and so I'll just give a quick background of where this all began. I'm a research fellow at the University of Minnesota and a PhD candidate in housing. So I study affordable housing, I study poverty, I study homelessness. This began, research on homelessness in the Twin Cities began 4 years ago by actually a large healthcare system hiring me, and the University of Minnesota hiring me, partnered together to look at homelessness in the Twin Cities, because it's starting to increase. In the last 3 years, street homelessness has increased by 60%. I'm now finding out from some of our social service providers that are on the ground that it's increased by 70% just since March. So it is just kind of, it's becoming its own pandemic, its own epidemic. And so all of our research out of the U really kind of came together, and Settled was birthed out of that. And so essentially what we fundamentally realized is that homelessness, our kind of national understanding of homelessness is really based off of wrong assumptions. The smallest portion of the homeless population are those that are trapped in long-term homelessness. They make up about 20% of the homeless population, but they use 80% of the resources. So we are pouring, as a society, a lot of dollars into maintaining the homelessness of that 20%. And the way that we think that we're getting them out of homelessness is by building more affordable housing. And the national model is called Housing First. Housing First is great. It was a step forward from years past, decades past, of what we just kind of made people jump through hoops. Housing First said, hey, let's get people into housing, and then they can work on the things that keep them in homelessness. But it doesn't go far enough. Our neighbors that are in long-term homelessness don't just lack housing. More than housing, what they have lost is the connection of family and community. And the system is, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, all of you, but our system is really broken. It's very siloed and fragmented, and it's frankly very, very frustrating and difficult to get through. I've personally walked alongside people and tried to help them navigate that system. And many times it can be really dehumanizing. It can be ultra barrier after barrier. So Settled, the model of Settled is really a community first model. So what we're saying is that people don't just lack housing, they lack community. And what they need is we don't just need more shelters. First of all, shelters are expensive. Shelters are good when you're just kind of dipping into homelessness and need to be helped back up. But our most expensive population is that long-term homeless. We have studies in the Twin Cities alone that they cost over $100,000 per person per year to maintain their homelessness. And so how do we help kind of the hardest to house and the most expensive? And how do we invite them into a community where we're not segregating them, we're not curating housing, but we're inviting them into something that is intentional. And we want to partner with faith communities in order to do that, because a faith community already has a built-in kind of social network or a support system. So this is the model of Settled. We partner with our an outreach entity that knows our homeless neighbors by name and relationship. We get to know them first and foremost. And we get to know them by their story and their name. And we start to invite people from the church out to meet them also. So that now we're starting to build kind of a social network. And then we start to help them get on SSI or SSDI to be able to have some sort of ability to pay rent. The model is such that everyone has skin in the game. It's just that our homeless neighbors can't find any housing that's affordable to them. And so many of them, all of them, in fact, are on very, very, very long wait lists, 7 years, 10 years before you're going to get an affordable housing unit. And we're just simply not building enough affordable housing. The affordable housing that we're building in the Twin Cities is $250,000 for a studio apartment. That's new construction. That's what we're spending. We are in a housing deficit of 1.2 million units in the nation. That's 1,100 units just in the Twin Cities. How are we going to overcome this if we just continue to build $250,000 units? So the settled model is to cut that in fraction. We build $25,000 homes, but we build homes that people want to live in and they want to pay rent on. So everyone has skin in the game. Everyone pays rent, but we're just creating a rental model where they can pay $200 a month, something that they can afford, something that they can point to and say, I can live here. I'm not it's not a government subsidy I'm able to afford this. And then we know that the number one reason that affordable housing doesn't get built is that not in my backyard opposition. And that's what every city is scared of. And that's what all of you should be scared of, right? Because you're at the helm of this thing at your city, and you're nervous for your constituents to come to you and say, we don't want this here. We don't want the poor in our community, and the homeless aren't here, and let Minneapolis and St. Paul take care of that, and just not here, not in our backyard, not Forest Lake. And so we've actually strategized around that so that it's just something that becomes a neighborhood asset. That Forest Lake is put on the map as a place that is innovative, where you are having a tiny home community that is beautiful, that adds aesthetic beauty to your already beautiful community. Each home is custom designed by an architect. They are made to last like a single family home, built like a single family home, to last 50 or 100 years when well maintained. We have great professional property management so that this is a neighborhood asset. And then our secret sauce, because every good project has to have a secret sauce. And ours is missionals. Missionals are resource people who have a calling or a desire to be a good neighbor and to live among the poor. They feel that this is their calling in life. And this is households. It's singles, it's couples, it's families with children. And we're basing this off of a very successful model of a village in Austin, Texas, where 250 micro homes are there, and 50 of those homes are filled with missionals. The other 200 are filled with people coming out of long-term homelessness, that hardest to house population that I'm talking to you about. But the 50 homes that are households that are filled with missionals are really that secret sauce, because what it does is it just kind of erodes all of those arguments and fears of who are the homeless and what kind of neighbor are they going to be in our community. And so we have someone coming off the street and someone coming out of, middle America, coming and living together. And they're living in the same type of housing, and they're paying the same rent, and they're waiting on the same service calls, and they're growing veggies in their same, garden beds. And that really, what that does is it allows for our neighbors off the streets who have really experienced that profound and catastrophic loss of family, which leads to the profound and catastrophic loss of community, to be invited into the folds of family life, into family dinners and game nights and nightly walks and all the things that just make us feel like we're home. Everything that we're doing at Settled is to create something that's scalable. So Forest Lake could be the very first place that a sacred settlement comes and is created, but we see this happening in Edina, in Minnetonka, and the East Side, and everywhere that a church and faith community is willing to kind of rise up and put their hand up and say, This is our mission. Our mission is to care for the poor. And the way that we want to care for the poor is by inviting them into our abundance. So we are presenting 12 homes at Forest Lake with 6 additional homes that would be missionals. So it's people coming off the streets, but once they have that home, they're no longer homeless. They will always, these are all 12 of those homes will be filled with people that have a connection to Washington County. Many times those will be beautiful home welcoming stories. People that are from Washington County, grew up in Washington County, like my very good friend, Anthony, who has been living on the streets for 7 years. He grew up in Washington County, graduated high school from there. His daughter graduated from there. Life started to just kind of unravel. A wife that cheated on him. Everything started to dissolve. Lost his business. All the horror stories that we just all thank God that didn't happen to us, right? But it happened to Anthony, and I had the privilege of getting to know him and meet him 4 years ago, and now he is one of my great friends, who my own small children know and enjoy and call a friend. And Anthony has been living on the streets of St. Paul because Washington County doesn't have anything for single adults. But this could be an amazing opportunity to welcome Anthony back home and give Anthony an ability to also then give back. He has a desire to help others come in and to build homes and to tend gardens and all of the things, to wake up and have purpose. That is so critical to all of this. And so, another part of that settled model is really that everyone has a role in the community and an identity. It's a place where you're welcomed in, and you're known and you're loved, just as you are. We aren't trying to fix people. We will partner with all the social service providers that are out there, and social service providers love us because they want to get their people into housing, and they know that there's just not enough, and they know that there's too much work for them to do alone. And so we have extensive training where we not only come alongside a church congregation and train them on how to have this on their property, but we also train up an army of volunteers, not just from the host church, but from every church that sponsors a home in that community. And those advocate befrienders walk alongside each neighbor. So each neighbor is the CEO of their own life, but then there's 5 advocate befrienders per neighbor that walk alongside them. And they're kind of that board of directors, kind of offering mentorship and advice and helping connect people with the social services that they need. So what we're presenting to you today is 4 years of research coming to you from the very best practices in the nation, all kind of under one umbrella. So we're taking the best models that we've seen out there, from the tiny home movement to the community first model to the advocate befrienders and partnering with faith communities, and kind of adding these things together so that this can be something that your community looks at and says, we are so proud of this. Our community is better for it. And other communities can be looking to you as kind of this shining star and wanting to do it too. So that's just kind of in a nutshell where this project has come from. I'm going to pass it on to Pastor John from Faith Lutheran to just kind of share from his perspective in his church.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a wonderful introduction into just why Gabrielle and I met in the first place. I think about the quote that if you drive by a gas station, you expect to see people pumping gas. And if you drive by a church, you should expect to see people serving and helping their neighbor. So here, I'd say, I'm Pastor John Cloward. I've been at Faith for a little over 4.5 years now. And what I would say I've learned a lot about our church in that time is that we truly have a mission of being able to help our neighbor. This is the thing that inspires our congregation. If there's a need to help the kids in the school, that's what our church loves to do. If there's a need to help with homelessness, it's something that, as Fran referenced at the beginning of our presentation tonight, how when when St. Andrews and Mount Omidai proposed this idea of having the Hugo Family Shelter, this was a conversation that our church with other churches in Forest Lake had been talking about for years. Gwen Hansen, who has recently passed away, this was something that was near and dear to her heart. And I know a lot of you have had Gwen as a teacher. You know Gwen's reputation. This is something that, as I was even just anointing her with oil before she died, we were talking about this, and I was saying, Gwen, this is something that you planted that seed here, and she just gave a thumbs up and just was like, this is it. She was so proud that this was going forward and that her church could be a part of what is happening here at with the Sacred Settlement. So well, I know what you're thinking is, why faith? I'll tell you what, I heard Gabrielle make a presentation about this a little over a year ago at St. Andrews in Mount Omidai. There was service agencies and other churches who were there, and as Gabrielle was talking, I had an idea, I had something floating in my head. You see, we've got a generous member who dropped by a couple of times, over a year ago with a check, and in that check for his designation, he said he wanted it to be able to help the poor, the hungry, the homeless, and the veteran. And I was thinking to myself, I mean, what do we do? Because this is a $50,000 check. How are we going to be able to do that? And so to honor Chuck's gift, as I'm listening to Gabrielle make the presentation very similar to what you all just heard, I got to thinking, wow, what if we were able to make 2 tiny houses, for $50,000, and the numbers that Gabrielle was saying, it would cost about $20,000 to $25,000. What if we had 2 tiny houses? And so I went up to her and I said, do you think we'd be able to have a tiny house for a veteran? And she looked at me and she said, yeah, yes. She was immediately able to talk about someone like Anthony. I've been able to meet a gentleman named Alex. David is also a veteran. I've met some veterans, and I got to thinking, wow, this could actually be the thing that unifies and brings us together in Forest Lake, because it does really hit on things that our community is passionate about. Within our community, I see that, and especially in our church, I see that we're passionate about homelessness. Our church is very passionate about veterans. We've created a veterans ministry in the last year that has really started to thrive, and they've seen this as an opportunity to walk alongside this. And also within the tiny house movement as something much more environmentally friendly. And so kind of catching people from our community and our congregation in each of those different ways. There's definitely an opportunity for this to be something mutually beneficial as we look towards more affordable housing, not just on church land, but just for for Forest Lake and other cities to start being able to consider into the future. And I think the reason this really kind of caught my attention is because as churches, we have land. And so this model of saying that our church is this sacred place where people would be able to live and be able to have community. And I was drawn into this missional model that it would be a collaborative opportunity. So not only would there be missionals, but there'd also be these advocates from our church. We've got befrienders in our congregation who would be able to walk alongside, and just so that it's a relationship and it's really helping people grow. So I think how this will help faith grow in the future, and why this is something that I'm excited for. And as our congregation voted to enter this exploratory phase, this development phase, I think the reason why it was so our congregation was so much in favor of it was they saw that this was an opportunity for us to really live out our mission, to be able to love our neighbor as ourselves, to be able to say, wow, we see a need in the world, and this is where God's calling us to do it. I think about the safety and stability of, now all of a sudden we'd have this neighborhood watch. You've got a group of people who are living together. Aaron will talk about that in a few minutes. Aesthetically, it's a very beautiful settlement, and there's going to be a sense of pride about that. I think about other ways that our church can grow from this, and it could be as simple as one of our confirmation groups going over to the kitchen and making cookies together with the residents and being able to share and be able to learn kind of just firsthand some of their stories and understand where people have come from, and how that can help actually deepen their faith, sometimes perhaps breaking them out of some of their bubble and privilege. this could be a way for some of our passionate millennials who like to garden to be able to garden together with the residents, or some of our recently retired boomers to be able to deepen relationships and provide transportation to someone who's got a doctor's appointment. I love the missional and the advocate and those models, but I also love that this isn't just about Faith and Settled, that there's also other churches that are walking alongside it. We've got a partnership with Woodland Hills in Maplewood, and also with Woodbury Lutheran, as there's already advocates at Woodbury Lutheran who are walking alongside. Some of the people that we think would be great candidates who have those roots in Washington County, as Gabrielle's already mentioned. We're also talking to these other churches around the metro, and they're really excited and they're intrigued by how this could happen. I definitely see that Faith is not the only church that would do this. That in many ways we want other churches to be able to do this, as we're hearing these numbers. We know that this is a growing concern with being able to provide affordable housing. How could we help pave the way for that? And I think the last thing I really want to address is the NIMBYism. I think in the news we tend to maybe have our own stereotypes about what homelessness is, and we're even seeing that kind of play out as there's just people need to live somewhere, and so we're seeing settlements that have formed that are like tent encampments in Powderhorn Park. That's not what this is going to be. Jason Quill, who's on our development team and one of the millennial members of our congregation, he has been really passionate on our development team of being able to help articulate what we're looking to do here. And he recently wrote an article where he was talking about what is happening at Powderhorn Park, but also at the Kenwood encampment. And the Kenwood encampment has a very specific purpose of the people who are there. They're searching for affordable housing. There's some guidelines, there's some rules. I definitely see that a lot of what's being modeled there is what we're looking at here at Faith too, is that there's going to be a sense of community within the community, and then being able to just live and grow together. I'm excited and thrilled about the possibilities, and I've really appreciated that you've been able to give us the time to make this presentation tonight. I also think it's really important that you get a chance to see just kind of what this dream looks like, and hopefully this can take away some of your thoughts that it's about a tent city. And Aaron has done an amazing job of putting together some plans, so you'll get a good look at what this could look like and what we are dreaming in the future. So with that, Aaron, I'm going to let you take it away.
Oh, Aaron, you're on mute.
Okay, is that better?
There you are.
Okay, great. Thank
It's
you.
my only role tonight is to just tell people they're on mute.
I'm going to try to share some this slide deck here, which hopefully is that working?
Not yet. You have to sometimes hit the share. There you go.
Okay, good.
Perfect.
Yeah, so this has been just an extraordinary experience. I'm a little background on me. I'm an architect and an urban designer. I've been practicing for 40 years. I'm the immediate past president of the Metropolitan Interfaith Council on Affordable Housing, where I was a board member for about 15 years. And I've done a very wide range of work all over the country, both urban design and most kinds of architecture. And this is such an extraordinary group of people that has come together with this, real passion and commitment to do this. It's been such a pleasure to work with everybody on this, and I'm just loving Forest Lake. This is like, this house on the right is like a block from the church, and it's just really, it's, the threshold of affordability has not always been as high as it is. The neighborhood itself has a bunch of these small, lovely little comfortable things, little houses like this. And oh, how do I do this? There we go. Oops, hold it. Getting way far ahead of ourselves here. Let me try that again. Oh, this is going to be really interesting, isn't it? Okay, there we go. So this is an aerial of Faith Lutheran, and this is the plan, and you can see their property here, which is like that. And what we're talking about doing is taking about almost exactly an acre, a little bit less, and dedicating it to this sacred settlement. And so, but I want to get back to this notion of what's in the neighborhood. That when Forest Lake was founded, we built shelters for ourselves, as opposed, and we built what we needed at the time, trusting that as our families grew, we could add on as necessary. Developers and builders sell product by the square foot and amenities and so forth, and the rest of the real estate industry benefits and the tax base benefits. But this model of providing housing works well for most of us, and I'm not saying that should change at all. But there is a growing number, as we're all aware, of people for whom it doesn't work. And we're experiencing a lot of increasing homelessness, and this affects us all, socially and financially. So we're advocating for, at least in this sector, for a return to a strategy of housing as modest, secure, healthful shelter for those who need it. We need to house people safely, with dignity, and affordably. And let's see, is this gonna, yeah, okay. So I'm gonna talk about 6 points. A lot of them are really quick. In terms of this development, there's a sort of concentric nesting of places. The relationship within the sacred settlement between its essential parts. I want to talk about incremental development, which we might think of as phasing, but it's a little different. And then design principles that reflect Minnesota values. And then I want to show you house types, and then talk a little bit about sustainability, which Faith Lutheran calls creation care, which I love that. Understanding that home within the sacred settlement on church property with church and missional support and in the Forest Lake community in Washington County, with its resources in the North Metro region of the Twin Cities in the state. That kind of nesting of place is also reflected here, where we would have a fenced area of common house and the common indoor space and the common outdoor space for the sacred settlement, surrounded by tiny homes. And that the common house is like this transition between the sacred settlement and the church community and the neighborhood community. And we're talking about building, if you look over here on the left, a place where all three can come and gather outside and outside the common house for, sort of common stuff. So so this is the plan. There are 18 parcels, each with its own tiny home, and then common space that they are all related to. You can see as the plan is developed that we have these little subspaces as well. So there are a number of shared areas, and then each tiny home with its own parcel of land, which is like, would be, everybody would be related to one another. And that gets on to sort of the next. So this is the full development, and you can see how that diagram works. I want to talk a little bit about the three different areas. The common space with its common outdoor space and its common indoor space. So this building here would be a common house, and then the shared outdoor space. Pastor John was really excited to see that this is probably about to be a wedding outdoors there. Then the common house itself, the common indoor space, which has living and dining and kitchen, showers, and the dining area is sort of a multi-purpose space that can be used for various different things. It's a very simple structure, which is kind of a necessity. So that's sort of how that works. So that's the common areas, and then each tiny home parcel would have the tiny home itself, and you wouldn't see the wheels. We would skirt these, and then there's the common outdoor space for gathering, and then so that's kind of the interior of the lot. But on the frontage, you have a porch, which is kind of an intermediate place between the private space of the tiny home lot and the shared common space, where this guy here, he comes out and he's making himself available to to talk to people that might be passing by. Now, that leads to the question of the third space, which is really recognizing that that people who are homeless might not have the same sense of what's the safe amount of existential space. And this is something that really interests me. What is the distance that needs to be established between their private space and the shared common space? So, here you see this woman who's like leaning over the bench here, but here there's a lot more, over the rail as they walk by, and that distance, what's the appropriate distance? And that's something that as a design exercise, I'm really interested in looking at. So what's the proper dimension for social comfort? And so those three areas are kind of, what we're interested in doing. Then this question of incremental growth, how often does this happen? We're not going to open 18 tiny homes on day one. It's going to take a certain amount of time as we go through. And this shows one potential for, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 tiny homes. A couple of them would be missionals. The rest would be and then this would be lawn, and then as needs be, it would develop greater and greater, and that allows that incremental growth, which we used to do. It gives us greater agility. It allows us to respond more accurately to community needs as the development grows. I want to talk for a little bit about the Little House on the Prairie, Minnesota values. What is it that we really value here? It's like visual privacy, acoustical privacy, solar access year round. It gets cold, solar access. Indoor space related to outdoor space, and direct access to outdoors from one's own home, that relationship between inside and outside, and then identity from the shared space, or the street, as people walk by, that lot with its tiny home on it has, a character and identity to it that is expressed and developed by the people who live there. And that's kind of what we do. So that's, the Minnesota thing. So we've selected 2 vernacular house types to develop here. The Minnesota side yard. It's a 1-story house. Don't be frightened by this. This is the side yard house is a Tidewater. This is Charleston, South Carolina, but I've built dozens of these in a development not that far from Forest Lake 20 years ago, which are doing very well, that are one story. But the characteristics of it are, well, I'll talk about that on the next slide. But and then the dog trot. There are 2 dog trot houses on this provisional plan. One here and the other one in the other corner. That would be 2 tiny homes with a little roof over the whole thing, which could actually be a good family thing. You know, parents on the one side with the kitchen and kids on the other with the living room, or something like that. Or it could be relatives. You know. Anyway, those 2 types. So the Minnesota side yard house, the way this works is that's the unit to the south, and you wind up with this yard, and all the windows are on the south or on these 3 sides. As you can see here, there are no view windows on the north, so the guy in this house can't see what this guy is doing per se, and so this person has privacy. And that's basically the notion, and it's designed for the ones that I've designed have been for this climate, and we would of course do the same thing here. The dog trot house, as I said, is these 2 small tiny homes that have this sort of shared breezeway, and it could be 2 individuals that know each other well enough that they're willing to do this, or it could be a family, and that's the other model. So I'm assuming that you probably have a few questions here, but this project also will be designed attempting within our resources and capacity to use sustainable, durable, energy efficient creation care, sustainable design for all of its systems and processes. Stormwater management to sewer and water to electric and so forth. And this is I saw this in Germany. This is a daylighted stormwater management thing that the kids sail their boats on. I mean, it's like, okay. Now, faith-based community living has a really long history in the United States. And this is a photograph of the Chautauqua. Theodore Roosevelt said, it's the most American thing in America. And I'd just like to point out that Faith Lutheran Church has been in Forest Lake for as long as the Chautauqua has existed in the United States. And finally, the church wants to create a community place in its longtime home here in Forest Lake. And I just, I would like to thank you very much for listening to me. I'm sorry if I ran a little over, and I look forward to our discussion and any questions you have for me, I'm happy to answer. Thank you. Uh-oh.
Thanks, Aaron.
And I'm talking on mute. I'm sorry. Was there anybody else on the Settled or Faith that wanted to speak as part of presentation? Or are you ready for Q&A?
You tell me, would it be worth hearing 5 minutes of sort of the land use zoning ordinance?
It absolutely,
right.
I love it. Let's do it.
Okay, I'll keep it really quick. And there is in your package a memorandum that I wrote, and at least Peter Michael, your city attorney, reviewed beforehand. But really quickly, we did an analysis of your code before we decided to proceed with a zoning amendment, just to see what your current ordinance would allow. And there are elements of this that do fit into your existing ordinance. And we think it's important that the city have this a cooperating relationship with Settled in letting us know what your concerns are, crafting an ordinance that overall will address what you anticipate will be your constituents' concerns and what we know will be our concerns in an ordinance that's modeled for the tiny home settlement. But at the same time, needed to go through your code and just see what we could do right now, mostly within the city's discretion to say no to us, which is part of why we think it makes a lot more sense to go forward with an amendment. But your current ordinance allows specifically churches, to include residential structures within their property subject to a PUD. It allows the city to grant exceptions to its general regulations, including regulations concerning lot size and building size, which would hopefully, obviously, from Aaron's presentation, would be an issue for tiny home. This is below what the city sets as its minimum house size, for example. So there'd have to be exceptions. And then you do have a current ordinance that addresses cabins, basically, resorts, I believe is the term your code uses, but essentially settlements for vacationers. I think some of the pictures that Aaron showed of the small cabins, I'm guessing started with something like that, where they were summer homes that were really used for summertime vacation purposes and weren't initially built as permanent homes. And your ordinance allows that. And if you think about even just as a typical state park campground, at least the car camping part of it, where there is a central building that's got restrooms and shower facilities, but each camper gets to park their camper or pitch a tent on a specific lot and live there for the summer. Your ordinance allows that, and they use the phrase temporary recreational use, which gives us some pause. I mean, the church is going to make a permanent commitment to this, and we don't want to go forward with something that is defined as temporary from the outset or recreational from the outset. It would be too much of a stretch for the city, for us to ask the city to make, and honestly, it wouldn't be very secure for us if the city did make that stretch. So that's sort of the basis from where we're starting. You already have authority within your code to approve something like what we have on a church ground. You've got authority to approve, at least on a temporary basis, a housing type such as we're proposing. But we think it makes sense for the city to proceed on a more intentional basis with an ordinance that's really designed for what we intend to do and what we hope the city will support us doing. So that is what we'll be hopefully working with you on, and hopefully not over a very long period of time. So thank you again for having us in to talk about this, and whatever questions you've got, I'd love to hear them.
Very good. Thank you. Members of the Planning Commission and City Council, let's open it up for questions and answers. If you have questions, please either raise your hand or drop them into the chat window. And I would ask my counterpart, Commissioner Langness, or Chair Langness, to help me in navigating the questions, given we've got a fair number of people on screen. So, and with that, actually, I'll recognize you first. Chair Langness, if you want to kick us off.
Sure. In full transparency, I want to make known that I did meet with Pastor John, and I can't remember who else it was with, but it was very early on when kind of some media stories came out in an informational setting, just so that that's out there and everybody knows. And I absolutely admire their passion and appreciate that they have the private sector, nonprofit, religious organizations trying to solve the problem of homelessness versus that of government and taxpayers. Those are two things that just unequivocally I appreciate right off the bat. I know Gabrielle had talked about NIMBY, or Not in My Backyard, a little bit, and Pastor John touched on it as well. And I would really caution your team to go down that route. And welcome you to look more in our community, because I truly don't think our community is the type of not in my backyard instantly, but they are the type of community that want good projects and forward-looking things that work well. So will there be concerns? Sure, but I don't think we're inherently not in my backyard. Getting into my question, and Gabriel had talked about a lot of academic research, and I know we got some information today a couple hours before the meeting, and I buzzed through it, but not a lot, and I didn't see the academic research in there. And I'm wondering if she can share that information with us, or point us to other resources that we could independently review as this process kind of moves forward.
Sure. Is that just a comment, or would you, is that a follow-up, or?
Yeah, I don't expect you to go through all of the academic research you've done over 5 years momentarily, but I'm asking if you could point us to where we might look in the short term, and if you could gather what information you think is most relevant to this.
Yeah.
Share that with us as we're moving forward.
Absolutely. We absolutely encourage all of you to visit our website. It's besettled.org, besettled.org. That's going to show you our housing prototype, how we built it, what it includes. It's going to show you the community first model that is all research based, based out of the organization out of Austin, Texas. And it's going to do a ton of frequently asked questions in there. And just there's a learn page on there with a lot of information that we share about substance abuse and mental illness and all the things that kind of float to the forefront when we think of homelessness. And I would just share that I don't think that the NIMBYism is specific to Forest Lake, and maybe that's why we've come to Forest Lake, because it's going to be an open and receptive community, and I pray that it is. But I've just seen that from the research that just nationwide, it's not Forest Lake specific, that NIMBYism is really strong, and in a lot of ways, every tiny home village that has been created has had to strategize around NIMBYism. And so we didn't want to just skirt around it. We wanted to enter straight into it. And we don't want to just get what we want out of this thing. We want the neighborhood to like this. And so, part of what we're doing is meeting neighbor by neighbor by neighbor, so that they know what this is, and they can just be honest, on one-on-one conversations about what their fears are about security, or the homeless are the pedophiles and the rapists, and those are real fears that are out there. And so we just talk through that, and we talk through it from a research lens, and then we talk through it from a social lens on how this kind of sacred settlement is managed, and what are all those key components that go into it. So I would say first and foremost, just look at our website, and then our website will point you to a lot of other places that we've drawn just a wealth of knowledge from. Yeah, and then stay tuned. I'm publishing a dissertation on what the community first model is. So it will be essentially kind of comparing it to the national model of housing first. If any of you like to edit a 400-page document, I'm open for, no, Eric, you're not my guy. All right. But I appreciate the question. I thank you. There is a lot of research that has gone into this.
Thank you. Commissioner Keen, I believe you were next, and you are on mute if you want to take yourself off mute.
All right, I just had a couple of comments on this. My first question is, does Faith Lutheran Church, do they own any other property? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
You cut out. We can hear you now.
Does Faith Lutheran Church own any other property?
No.
Okay. I know you're talking about, from Eric was talking about the minimized house size in the ordinances, but you plan on putting up 18 houses, not just one or two, our minimum, but you're planning on 18. So that's kind of got me there. And, and all your brochures and stuff that we were reading over the last couple of days here, you're freeing up resources. What resources are you freeing up?
Should I take that one?
Eric?
Go ahead.
Sure.
Sure. I think that, my colleagues at the university often say that it's the wrong pockets problem. So while cities are in charge of local zoning ordinances that kind of make kind of more sustainable development. Oh, by the way, Fiona is here. She's entered. And she's my little Zoom buddy. Here's a little wave. But it's the county that really pays for the social services. So that's that wrong pockets problem. The county, as Commissioner was telling us earlier, is struggling. I've talked with many commissioners over the last 5 months since COVID, and they are struggling in a very, very real way. We are so underwater as a region on homelessness. It's just blowing up, it's increasing, and it is so costly, these emergency resources. And so what we're proposing is something that is literally 1/10 of the cost of permanent traditional housing, but it's also a fraction of the cost of providing emergency services. And emergency services aren't cheap. They're expensive, and they frankly make people feel more disconnected from the community, and they fall deeper and deeper into homelessness, and it's harder to get out. So in terms of kind of freeing up resources, that's what we're kind of talking about. But then also, we're building things that are 200 square feet, and so it's much smaller, and so we use less resources and we use common space, so that we're just being more sustainable in the way that we use resources, in terms of water and materials and that sort of thing. Does that answer it, Michael?
Yes, it does. Then my last question, I noticed in the videos, they showed a tiny house with wheels, and they said, well, the tiny homes, they'll cover those wheels up. It had a fire pit, a couple chairs, but all the other videos show like 2-story homes. I mean, they're smaller than a normal home, but so I'm just, yeah, go ahead.
Last minute, I thought that Aaron should take that slide out, but we just we wrestled and he won. No.
Well,
the thing is that it's not meant to be 2 stories. What we're building is a single-story home. We are building something that is simple but beautiful. And what Aaron is showing you is a vernacular that's part of Minnesota. We're not introducing a new vernacular. We're introducing something that's so Minnesota. I definitely welcome all of you to come and tour our little prototype. We lovingly named it Little Peach, and it's you can personally contact me. I will give you a 6-foot separation distance masked tour of Little Peach and just walk you through how we designed it and why. But yeah, it's a home on wheels. It's a 1-story home. It's simple but really well built. And then those wheels are covered. They are skirted around because we want this to be a permanent place that people live. So we want it to appear permanent. The reason that we're putting them on wheels is frankly because the state building code is a massive hurdle and mountain that we haven't seen. It's very difficult to overcome that. And so that's kind of why.
So not the 2-story buildings.
Not 2-story buildings. That's that.
Definitely not. And can I butt in for 1 second? Definitely not 2-story, and Gabriel was starting to talk about the building code issue. To give you a sense of the scale of this thing, it fits the state regulations for a recreational vehicle, and under state law, it's like a camper trailer, something that's pulled behind your car. this thing meets those standards and gets certified as one of those, to give you a sense of the scale. I think if you look around the country at what passes for tiny homes, and that is a specific thing, and there's an organization that regulates those, and this isn't literally one of those. This is really tailored for this specific use. And on the ordinance level, that's, I think, one of many details that we're going to look at and negotiate with the city. Our intention is a very small space, under 400 square feet, and I think it's smaller than that. And essentially a single room, possibly with a sleeping loft, and enclosed, probably camper toilet sort of facility, if anything. So it's really very small. Definitely not 2 stories.
Michael, I'd like to, I apologize for not having had the time to actually prepare renderings and perspective drawings of what this might be. But as both Gabriel and Eric said, these are 1-story buildings. They will be detailed and skirted so that they have a sense of permanence about them, that they really seem like really nice, modest cottages, and they will in reality be hand built. We're developing the production facility as we speak, which has been funded. So I'm sorry I hadn't, but early on in the project, and the upside of that is that you'll have the ability to have more input.
Oh, well, thank you, because I wasn't sure if you're doing a trailer, you're doing a 2-story, or a single story. Thank you. I'm done.
On a related note, Commissioner Batty dropped a question into the question panel. I think you answered part of that with the approximate area of the tiny house and number of rooms. It sounds like they're planned to be single room. Is that accurate? Or maybe not known yet?
Yeah.
But then the other question related to that is there any planned plumbing to the tiny house itself? And that was from Commissioner Batty.
Gabriel, do you want to take that? Do you want me to take it?
Yeah, one more time.
Want me to take it?
I'm so sorry.
I don't want to volunteer anything that Gabriel doesn't want to do, but we've had discussions among ourselves about towing one up to Forest Lake at some point. I think that takes time and people to get that done, but I think certainly sometime before this ordinance is actually proposed to anyone, we'll bring one up there so people can see it. But I think part of what will happen in the planning process is the city's going to have some input on what they're willing to allow, and we'll obviously have some input on what we're asking to allow. But the basic model right now is essentially a single room. There are different things you can do with the design, if you're Aaron at least, to cut the same space up different ways. So some of them will have lofts, some of them will have areas where you can pull a curtain and have a private bedroom. It'll depend on the individual resident's desires, but I think the basic footprint of them will all be about the same, and here's where they need to stop me, about 8 by 20. Am I thinking that's right? Which is more like 160 square feet, right? 200 feet or less, with possibly a loft, but never a second story.
Right.
Yeah. Just in
they
general.
do. Both the lots and the tiny homes vary in size. I think the smallest lot is about 530 square feet, and the largest is a little over 1,400. The tiny homes are all 8.5 feet wide, and they vary in length from 16 to. There was a missional that the church has been talking to that has a 34-foot long one, which is a little over 200 square feet. So that's kind of the range. And if you look at the site plan, which I could call up if you want to see it again, you can see that there are a number of different sizes. And so they would also look different.
Thank you.
And if I could add, I think one of the things maybe we haven't quite got across, hopefully the pictures showed to some extent, the model could literally be, you know, something you would go buy from Winnebago or somebody in terms of the size of these things and how they get pulled behind a car. But the whole point of this is that each individual unit will be designed to truly look like a small house with exterior materials that are more like a house than like a trailer, and with insulation values that are up to Minnesota winter building code standards for a conventional home, and with grounds that are more like what all of us probably currently live with front porches and small gardens and some degree of outdoor space.
Thank you. City Council members, members of the Planning Commission, other questions? Commissioner Miller. And then we'll go Commissioner Gerard and, or Councilmember Gerard and Commissioner Brank after.
Thank you, Mayor Bain. Gabrielle, you probably don't remember me, but I met you back in November. In fact, our real estate company donated some money for one of your tiny houses that you had on our site that we got to tour. So I'm kind of disappointed, Aaron, that you didn't have pictures of the tiny house that they have on the trailer that's already built, and you could have given them a video tour of it, because it was kind of unique, and it was actually surprisingly nicer than I thought it was going to be. So I just wanted to put that out there that I have seen these. In fact, our company donated some money to Gabrielle for one of her tiny houses for them to build. But my question is, more around, you know, is this more of transitional housing? I mean, is it more around bringing people in, getting them some housing, getting them feeling part of the community, getting them working, getting them jobs, getting them to be a productive member of this, you know, of the community and involved in the community? Or is it more so just to give them housing that they get to live in forever at and no real plan on terms of when they have to leave or anything like that? I guess that's really my question. And then, you know, can you tell me how you're going to kind of, what's your plan with all that? Thank you.
So much, Kevin. I appreciate it. I feel like you're giving me a softball. I really appreciate it. Underhand. This is my favorite topic. This is so much of my research is that transitional housing is really actually just like a hoax. Transitional housing isn't really, at least for the chronically homeless, people that have fallen into long-term homelessness, transitional housing is just not what they need. They'll get into those programs and they'll be in it for 6 months, 9 months, a year, and then there is no magical affordable housing for them to move into. And so then they end up back on the streets, and it's just a cycle that is very, very, very expensive to taxpayers. And you know, kind of how I presented this earlier is that this is a community first model. We are inviting people that have been very displaced, most often from childhood, really abusive, neglective, violent upbringings. And they've not ever experienced home. And so this is a place where they're allowed to be indefinitely. And the reason why this is so good is because this is a place that they're allowed to stay, they're welcomed, they belong, they're allowed to grow roots and be settled. And then they start to invest in that community. And transitional housing, what you're seeing at Powderhorn, what you're seeing at the hotels, is that there's no skin in the game. They're not paying any rent to be there. There's no actually community rules that they all agreed to, and they don't feel like it's theirs. So they're not investing in that. But when we invite people to say, this is your forever home. You're allowed to be here indefinitely. We want you here. They start to invest in the community. They start to come up with ideas of how to make it better. And that's what we've seen at any of these tiny home communities that are permanent. Many of them are temporary, and that doesn't happen. But we want people to become members of Forest Lake and to be productive. And absolutely, every single human needs to feel purpose. They need to wake up and feel like they have something to do. Now, almost every one of our people coming off the streets are disabled. So they're not going to get a 9-to-5 job, but we can give them dignified work opportunities. Many of those can be helping maintain the sacred settlement and increasing their income so that they can have a dignified amount to live on, and work that they can do, a role in the community, so that, if they don't, water the gardens every Tuesday and Thursday, they know that those veggies are going to get crunchy, and their neighbors are going to be pissed that they're not getting fresh veggies that week. And so that's really the hope, is that our real vision for this thing is that the outside community that comes and sees this, we're not trying to gate them off so that nobody gets to see this thing. We want people to come and experience it and partake and be a part of this thing. But we want, we believe that the outside community is going to come in and experience how people are living intentionally and communally, and they're going to say, I want to be a part of something like that, because every one of us want to be a part of something. We all want to be known and loved. And what we've learned from Community First Village in Austin, Texas is, that there are missionals out there. One of the missionals is the CEO of $1 billion tech company. He and his wife downsized from their 5,000 square foot home to a tiny home in this village with the chronically homeless. So they were living in the wealthiest community of Austin, Texas, downsized to a community built for the chronically homeless. And I'm sitting in their tiny home for hours, and they're telling me that it's their distinct privilege to live in this community, that they were segregated, and not segregated, they were isolated in their 5,000 square foot, kind of McMansion. And so that's the hope of this thing, that it's permanent housing that people get to live in and be in. Yeah.
Thank you. Councilmember Gerard, and then Commissioner Brink.
Thank you, Mayor. My wife and I are involved in the Hugo Transitional, and we volunteer there, and it's pretty much 3 or 4 or 5 months, and they expect you to be able now to move on. You're looking pretty much at permanent residence here. So what's the long-term financial model to keep this viable?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've actually kind of over-designed the homes. A lot of people, particularly ice fishermen, like to talk about their fish houses with us, and they're like, we could build this for $5,000, and we're like, but we're not building shacks, because nobody wants to stay in a shack forever. But we've really we've insulated these homes so well that actually it runs off a space heater, a nice space heater, a Dyson. But the overall operations cost of the village is covered by all the rents. And so it's a sustainable model where rents cover the operations. The only kind of additional cost that comes with this is property management, and that is really run in partnership with Settled, so that there is really a great professional property management that's happening on site, so that the church doesn't have to play that role of fines and collecting rent and giving out tickets and that sort of thing, so that the church can just be, the big open arms, and property management can kind of be, the finger waggers.
Thank
you. Commissioner Brink.
Thank you, Mayor. So far, obviously, everything I've heard sounds wonderful. The concept of the tiny homes is great. Definitely do not need to be sold on that. It's a wonderful project, I think. I was wondering if you could possibly just briefly speak to the challenges of the community as a whole, not necessarily the, the brick and mortar, so to speak, but just researching some of the other tiny homes. Olympia, I think, was one location. About 80% of the residents are recovering from addiction. And having personally worked with mental health as a nurse for several years, knowing that, obviously that is an issue. Could you speak to maybe some of that as far as how community members, I guess, how everything kind of works in that aspect?
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Oh, totally. I appreciate that question. Are any of you TED Talk like junkies? There's an amazing TED Talk that's called "Everything That You Think You Know About Addictions Is Wrong." And it's so wonderful. And it goes through this research of scientists who really they talk about Rat Park, and they talk about how they were studying rats' intake of cocaine for many, many, many years. And they're in a cage, and they have regular water and they have cocaine water. And the rats would just go and take that cocaine water until they killed themselves. And that's what we see on the streets because there is nothing else to do. There is no other option. It is hopeless out there. There is a spirit of hopelessness so profound out there. Now, one researcher decided, hey, there's nothing really else for them to do in this cage. What if we gave them like some options? We gave them some like breathing room so that they could mate, they could go on little mice dates, they could, kind of play. There was exercise, there was activity, and that sort of thing. So they built Rat Park, essentially, with all the like wonderful things, basically like luxury housing. And they put the rats in there that were already addicted to cocaine, and they gave cocaine water and regular water. And what they found was that the rats that were already addicted would go and take a little nibble off of the cocaine-laced water, just enough to kind of take off the edge after you got off of work and you just want to get a little glass of wine, but not anymore where they weren't like coherent and could go and socialize with their other neighbors. And so what they've learned from all this research is that, mental illness and substance abuse just get worse when you're in isolation. And they're really diseases of isolation. But when you're in community, a community, like intentional community, I've been saying the word community a lot tonight, but, and I know that word has been kind of like, it's kind of hollow these days, but I mean like real community. Like people know you and they're willing to stop and ask. And when you say like, it's been a tough day, they take the time to sit down and ask and listen. And so what they found at Community First Village in Austin, Texas, without giving any, there's no kind of prescription for, no drug use or alcohol use or anything. They're taking the chronically homeless, the hardest to house, most expensive to the public, and bringing them in. That drug and alcohol use has decreased by 60%. Just by being in community. And then many people are choosing to go into rehab. But when you're on when you're isolated on the streets, or even put in an isolated housing unit where you don't know your neighbors and they don't know you and they don't know your background, you can't relate and they don't care to get to know you, you're still going to those old coping mechanisms. So anyway, I love to geek out on all of that. And I would love to, if Justin, if you wanted to talk more about like kind of your experience as a nurse and what you've seen, and I would welcome that. And
I'll add on, Gabrielle, I'll add on to that too, that a huge part of what we've seen within the advocate model is that not just the missional. So the whole thing doesn't just fall on the people who are living in the community, but it's also these advocates. So we've got someone like Andrew, who's a veteran, who's been walking alongside David and being able to walk alongside him when a lot of these potential issues are there, to be able to say, hey, I got your back. So even if something does happen, there's that trust and building in that relationship with each other. And that doesn't just fall on one person. That there's multiple people who have been walking alongside of David. And so within this model, we're not just saying, okay, missional, you've had a day at work and now you come back and all of a sudden your day is all of this. No, there's a sense of mutual accountability with the missionals, with the advocates, and then even with the churches in general. We've got our own role within this. So I would say that that's a big piece of of where the circles of the relationship extend out, and that's where we as a church see our role in that as well.
Yeah, I think that's probably, and thank you, Gabrielle. That's I was kind of maybe leaning a little bit more towards what John was saying, is when the situation does come up, how is that mitigated? I don't think there's any question that communal gathering is more beneficial than in isolation, but obviously there are going to be people who are going to regress, and when that does happen, how does the community work, in tandem to help with that situation? So
one other part of that too is just being able to say, with the background check of potential residents too of sexual assault and violent criminals would not be great candidates to live in the community either, as we're trying to be able to be mindful of that. But that doesn't mean that wouldn't be something that another community would be able to embrace. So knowing that within all of the spectrum of potential residents, right alongside with you, Justin, that knowing that we've got something in place where there is that net for people to say, hey, yeah, we get it, and you've got a bad day, we've got your back.
Yeah. And I wasn't coming from any kind of preconceived notions about, where people were coming from, but just in a very general way, how that gets handled. So thank you.
Absolutely.
We've got Commissioner Young. I think you have your hand up.
Okay, I've got 3 questions. One, why did you decide to locate this on the east side of the property instead of the west, in terms of being able to, for secure issues? The second one is, I'm looking at the other locations that you're referencing, and except for Madison, which is warmer than Forest Lake, they're all in relatively warm places. And as someone who recently had some health challenges, I got to tell you that if I had to had as a temporarily disabled person across the parking lot to the restroom facilities at 20 below with a 40 below wind chill, that would have been a challenge for me. And so I'm really questioning for Minnesota the restriction that you would not have restroom and water facilities in these tiny houses. And then the third thing that I have a question about is, I've been working with volunteer organizations my whole life. And volunteers come and volunteers go. And pastors come and pastors go. And when you lose the driving force or the individual who is most passionate about a particular project, sometimes those projects are not as successful. My dad was a Legion commander, and when some of the folks that were passionate about the Legion left, getting volunteers to keep the facility up was brutal. So the east versus west of your property, the winter hygiene issues, and then this is to be a long-term gig. And how do we make sure that your volunteer base is a long-term gig? Because once we go with the ordinances and once this is in place, we don't get to turn around and go the other way.
I'll let Aaron answer the first 2, and then I'll take the third.
Okay.
So I'll just start with the third one because I think that is so crucial and correct. Yeah, like volunteers come and volunteers go. Pastor John's amazing pastor, and his congregation loves him so much, and I bet other congregations want him. And so, like, what does this look like? Well, we've built into the model that every single one of those homes is sponsored by another church. And the reason that we do that is so that we're bringing in funding from all over the Twin Cities, but also we're bringing in the mission and volunteer and kind of awareness of that whole congregation. And so we have many partner churches that we're working with, and so they're not just trying to raise up $25,000 for one home or 5 befrienders. They're talking about this with their whole congregation, so that there's that basically that church is saying, we're committed to making this particular sacred settlement thrive. So one of our senior pastors at a mega church is really famous for telling us it's going to take a village to raise a sacred settlement. And so that's really where that comes from, is that it doesn't all just land on Faith Lutheran or Pastor John or his congregation, but it's every church that sponsors that home and kind of commits to coming alongside them. And he already mentioned a few earlier of these wealthy mega churches that are totally into this thing with us, and bringing their congregation along and sharing it on their blog and on their, and it's coming from senior leadership. We've also learned that it's senior leaders talking to senior leaders. And so Pastor John has been a part of lots of leadership alignment meetings with cross denominations, everything from very conservative to very liberal. And we've done that on purpose to just see, how do we create unity among these churches working together.
And even to add to that, as my dogs start chiming in, I would add to that too, the fact that when we did have that vote to go forward with this development phase, I'm talking tonight, but I haven't been the one doing all the driving of the ship since then. I mean, we've got a very strong 5-person development team, and they've been the ones making all of the contacts. They've been doing all the work. We also had some strong leadership before that, and so they've been able to chime in. Our council's been able to walk alongside this too. So this is my pet project, so to speak. And I'm also very invested in Faith. I'm not planning on going anywhere. So if anyone's on and that's what you're worried about, no rumors.
The other two pieces.
Yeah, the other two. I'm back up here, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The question about whether about placing the settlement on the east side versus the west side, there are a number of significant reasons to place it over here. One is it fits really well. Secondly, it's close to the entrance to the church, and it's close to it's part of the neighborhood instead of being over in this no man's land by the highway. This area here, over on the southwest corner, actually can't be built on because what's that stuff called? The geothermal field is here, and so you can't place stuff on that. The other thing is that there's a playground here for the preschool that we felt it would be good to have that, that separation for noise and a number of other reasons, and it fits very nicely into the corner. So and it's accessible for walks and stuff. So that's this seemed to be a good location for it, and then and that there's the other entrances here to the church, and so that direct relationship from the kitchens and so forth, and music room and a number of the other and multi-purpose, that seemed to be a very good relationship as well. In terms of winter hygiene, I can't agree with you more. We are at this point looking at two different options for that. One is to plumb the facility with sewer and water, and the other is to I mean, in all cases, if you go look at Little Peach, you'll see that there is a water cistern on top that's gravity fed to the kitchen sink, and then there's a reservoir at the bottom that's emptied, and that just needs to be refilled periodically. And then in terms of sanitary, I've done a significant amount of research into various options for how to address that, which I'm still sort of in the process of doing. I don't know if I if you want me to say more about that, but that gets to state building code issues.
And, you know, you brought up the fact that a significant portion of these folks may be disabled. And
Yes.
I got to tell you, if I just had a knee replacement, and so if I'd had to go much more than 10 to 15 feet, life would have been real tough.
In your bathrobe when it's 20 below zero and it's 2 o'clock in the morning? I don't understand
right, sir.
what the problem is. Yeah, understood. It's a serious issue, and I've been really working on it. I've got a number of ideas. It's a little early to talk about the results yet. Thank you for bringing it up, actually.
Thank you. I've lost, could I have you stop sharing screen so I'm able to go back to the full Brady Bunch view here, see everybody, makes it a little easier when we're facilitating questions. Other questions, and I'm kind of scrolling through here.
Mr. Parker, could you stop?
Donovan, go ahead.
Sorry. Stop sharing. There we go. I'm sorry.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is Donovan. You know, my role is zoning administrator. I won't address any zoning issues at the moment. Seems like what this workshop is about is looking at the proposal. And I have a few questions. I've also collected some from other staff who aren't on the call this evening. But I'd like to go through a few of them. One of them relates to basically the fact that there is a school on site, you know, as mentioned earlier. And how will the background checks work to vet the homeless? And this may put kids at risk, drug, alcohol, sex crimes, sex offenders. What's the plan for preventing any sort of bad impacts on the kids?
Yeah, so we've, Faith Lutheran has decided that because there is an existing preschool there that they have a great relationship with, and we've been in conversations with the director of that preschool as well as parents that send their children to that preschool. It's been decided that the criteria will be that there will be no sex offenders. It doesn't just have to be on a registered sex offender list. We have several other ways of kind of finding that information out, really thorough backgrounds, that there'll be nobody with criminal histories that are violent criminal histories, or of selling drugs. So just to kind of take that off the table and the scariness of that for people.
Okay. Next, how do you propose, and this is, I guess, the question for Aaron, how do you propose to anchor the units since Forest Lake, you know, periodically does receive pretty heavy winds that would easily could topple a unsecured tiny house on wheels?
I read the zoning code, actually. I saw that, yeah, we've had that conversation. These tiny homes will be, there will be steel chassis. We will have footings below frost and foundations up to a hardware that solidly anchors the four corners of the unit, and structural engineer that makes sure that that's sufficient. And as I said, the structure will be skirted, and that area underneath will also be insulated and ventilated, so that you know, so that there's not moisture issues beneath there. But we will certainly anchor the structure solidly to the ground.
But it still will be on wheels, even though you had the frost footings?
No,
foundation?
it'll be raised. The wheels will not be touching the ground. They will, the trailer will be supported. I mean, the wheels will still be there, but they'll be like, an inch or two off the ground, and they'll be supported at the four corners by footing and foundation. That's also better for the tires.
Okay, thank you. Now I have a question regarding just basic kind of operations. And having been a former landlord myself, I know how units, basically rental units, receive a lot of abuse from renters. I mean, no matter who you have in the unit. And has basically a business plan been prepared to provide for reserves for repair, replacement, and connected to that on the operational level? Are you planning to contract with a professional organization that provides supportive services and security, 24-hour security for this project?
Sure. Yeah. So we shared earlier how we are in partnership with social service providers that are like-minded, that want to do things relationally instead of transactionally. But we believe that there's an enormous chasm between the people that need supportive services and the helping professionals themselves. And so that's where our advocate for Frienders kind of step in and help guide people to the services that they could really benefit from. So there's a whole network of social services out there. We're not duplicating any of that. Settled kind of comes in and partners as property management. So we have a professional property manager on staff who will manage the site. Someone who has worked with this population before and kind of can be the eyes and ears, pop in at different times of the week and different days, so that they're just kind of ears and eyes to everything that's happening. And then remember that a third of the people that are living in the community are missionals. And so they're also kind of ears and eyes to what's happening in their community. And then in terms of, rental properties get, smashed up and that sort of thing, we've really designed the tiny home to make sure that, so for instance, we haven't put drywall in our tiny homes. We've used plywood and board and batten, so that it just like really durable products that kind of hold up over time. But again, the financial model is that the rents cover the operational costs, so that this is a sustainable model financially, and it's not a drain on the church.
Also, I mean, you have noted how RVs are allowed on an interim or temporary basis within the current zoning code, and looked at the cabins that was built by residents in years past, and many of those were for the temporary use. I mean, seasonal use, or simply RVs of this nature, for the summer vacation. Gabrielle, what does your research indicate as far as, can people, and I understand, this is be vastly superior to where the conditions of some of the living conditions, which the homeless veterans might come from, but what's your research say about people who live in, this size of housing? And also how do you dismiss the concerns around the fact that these RV standards and all that are for a seasonal and temporary basis, and there's years of precedent for that. And it's kind of, but you seem like you're dismissing that precedent because of your cause, which is really worthy, and I support the cause. But in this case,
No. don't get me wrong. We've actually housed a couple straight, out of chronic homelessness in an RV, and it's terrible to live in an RV in the winter is absolutely awful. We have them living in the only one of 12 spots that are the only 12 spots of year-round RV living in the Twin Cities. And we had to do a lot of work to winterize that thing. So we are not interested in putting people in RVs. That's why we're building tiny houses on wheels. They are built just like a single family home. And I really appreciate this question because we kind of glanced over that, but these tiny houses on wheels, they're called THOWs. If you want to be hip and cool. So those are kind of a national movement that are happening kind of all over, kind of originated in the West Coast, but it's come all the way over. Commissioner Young mentioned the one in Madison, but those aren't built to our standard. We're building to a NOAA standard. NOAA is a third-party certifier. It stands for National Organization on Alternative Housing. And essentially what they've done with their research is recognized they've looked at the residential code, they've looked at the RV code, and they've looked at the park model code. And they've taken everything that makes sense for this size home and taking kind of all the best of those things. And so we're building to a very high standard. Like I said earlier, we're not building $5,000 shacks, we're building $25,000 homes that will last 50 and 100 years, built just like a single family home in Minnesota. So that's kind of really the difference, is that we're, an RV is built with 2x2 construction. It has an insulation value of R7. We're building things to an R30 and R50 value so that they're highly insulated and made for this, particularly for our climate. So not only is the design, a vernacular of Minnesota, but the way that we're building our construction is a vernacular of our climate.
But then, who is certifying that they're built to that NOAA standard?
Yeah, so NOAA is a third-party manufacturer or third-party certifier, and there are dozens and dozens of cities that recognize their certification. So essentially, it's certified like a single family home where there's a 5-step instead of like a RV where it's like the whole manufacturing site is certified. This is like a single family home where every home is individually certified, and there's a five-phase certification for that really high quality. So looking at the trailer, the insulation, the roofing, the electricity, and so on. And then you get your stamp of approval. Again, we want to bring Little Peach back to Forest Lake so that you all have an opportunity to kind of tour it, and we can talk with you more about the NOAA certification. You're welcome to look at their website. It's noaacertified.org, and there's lots of communities nationwide who accept NOAA certified THOWs in their communities.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. A couple more, if I could dominate here. So, just recently, Governor Walz, issued an emergency order that restricted gatherings to less than 10 people. How do you anticipate dealing with, future situations which could be very similar with COVID-19 restrictions, when you have a community that, could easily be more than 10 but be required to share a space as in the congregational space?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question because I feel like many commissioners from several different counties have contacted us, and county commissioners have asked us, how many tiny homes can you build and how quickly? Because this is a model that really addresses COVID and other pandemics that might be, coming down the pipeline. I hope not, but if they do. So because it's an individual space where you can shelter in place and be at home. And then that common house, you just kind of put protocols in place to allow for that to be a safe place for that group. Like many really successful businesses, you create a pod. And so that is your pod, the group of people that live in that community that are sharing that community. I'm sure many of us have double bubbled or triple bubbled, right? So we're not just only with our family anymore, but we've kind of expanded to allow for a few other families that can be there. And so that's kind of what this is like, is that the Sacred Settlement would be a pod that each have their individual homes that have some protocols to be pretty vigilant about keeping the common space clean and sanitized, and then, kind of operating in that bubble.
Certainly. Thank you for answering those. I did, I'll let everyone know that I did, upon Gabrielle and Ann's invitation, go do the tour. Eric was there as well. So I did visit Pete, you call it, the little house? Petey?
We call it Little Peach.
Little Pete. I learned a lot about the population that they seek to serve, and appreciate what they're trying to do, and just have these concerns around it being how and where it's being placed in Forest Lake. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Donovan. Commissioner Young.
When we talk about the zoning ordinance, and basically what you will be asking is that we essentially waive just about every single provision of our zoning code. I haven't found any that you haven't asked us to waive yet. And again, I am a little concerned, once we do this, going back is not an option. And so I'm yes, the concept is way cool. I understand the need. My own living situations at various points in my life have been challenged. But in terms of our responsibility to the city, we need to be very thoughtful and deliberate about looking at this as a zoning ordinance and the precedent that it is setting for not only your application, but any other opportunities to use the changes to the code that you're proposing in other locations in the city, because this will set significant precedent.
If I could jump in with there's questions here in my kind of in my question box. They're not questions I'm expecting that we're going to answer tonight,
right,
but they piggyback off of some of the concerns that Commissioner Young just expressed. So I'm trying to articulate what's a workable challenge, or what are some of the questions we need to ask as a community to be able to address how we might frame whatever this solution might be, and if that is a zoning change, if it's an ordinance to insert, we're an organization of statute, so insert whatever that statutory mechanism is here. And just thinking about reconciling from where we are today to what we would need to be, to me, this comes to there's a foundational question around density that I think we need to ask. And because of who we are and where we are today in our code, residential zoning is all around density, multifamily and single family. And if we are going to allow tiny home residences in a single family district, what does that look like? And this becomes very technical very quickly, and I know we're not here to get into all of those questions tonight, but some questions to think about is, if tiny homes are allowed, under what circumstances are they allowed, and under which density? Minneapolis in their 2040 comp plan was viewed as being incredibly revolutionary in eliminating some single family housing, and they are now allowing, duplexes and triplexes across the city. And something to accommodate this, unless it were very site specific, is going from what we have today as single to up to 18. And that's, kind of off the charts revolutionary. And so I think the question is, under which zoning district is it located, and what's the appropriate density for that? And, what are we okay, what are we comfortable with? We've had conversations at the Planning Commission and council level, specifically around the 2040 comp plan of allowing smaller lot sizes, of allowing more accessory dwelling units. I think we've been open to some of these concepts. I think the question is, how would this type of application get reconciled to where we are, and what's the appropriate pace? Or what are we comfortable with in however we might frame up this solution? So I think about density by zone, and think about we're in a sharing economy, which is lovely, and it provides a lot of options. However, if something that isn't well crafted could end us up in a very different place unintentionally around, somebody could have, 6 tiny homes in their backyard lakeside that is now their Airbnb business. And how do we craft allowing some more uses from what we have today, but also recognizing we're setting a standard for the entire city of Forest Lake, and how might that, whatever words we put on page, how might that be interpreted and used by residents who are incredibly creative? And I think we're open to a standard different from where we are today. But I think we need to be very thoughtful on that, because we are, again, there's application level considerations, and then we've got citywide considerations, and we're going to find a balance on both. Commissioner Young, I know you have a follow-up.
Yeah.
Go ahead, and I have one other element I want us to think about.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, and which zoning codes are we going to allow this in? For instance, do I let Susan Young's Wicca organization on her ag zoning put 40 tiny houses? Looking at this, probably. So we need to say, where are we going to call this on our zoning code? If they are conditional uses, which zoning designations are they conditional uses of? Or are we going to use these as PUDs? And that's a whole different kettle of fish.
Right. You mentioned conditional uses, and I have some concerns, and would need, and this is kind of in my question bucket of how can we, if this is going to head down the conditional use path, are there other areas where those have worked successfully with residents? Because I love this concept in that it is not transitional housing. You are looking for a permanent solution or some level of permanence. But that does not reconcile well with a conditional use permit. And we, future councils, future planning commissions, enforcement of that becomes incredibly challenging when you're talking about taking somebody's home away. And so I get a little twitchy when we think about conditional use permits and long-term housing, because I think they're fundamentally on a different path. And I'm getting a little heady here, and I don't mean to get technical, but just something to think about as we're crafting what the path forward might look like. Go ahead, Eric, please.
Yeah, thank you. First, I want to say thank you. I don't intend to cut off the discussion with what I'm about to say, because I'm hugely grateful we're getting into this level of detail at this point. But honestly, we were thinking this was an introduction and an opportunity to tell you who we are and what we want to do. I don't want to pretend we couldn't answer these questions if you guys have another couple of hours tonight, but really we understand all of these things have to be discussed and answered. We have our opinions about how we might address these things, but what I'd like to ask the city to do, and not necessarily right now, you first understand we didn't come here with a specific request and intentionally and realistically, I think. But you know, I think the things the city could do at this point is direct staff to work with us a little offline, basically, for the next couple of weeks and come back and talk a little bit more detail about some of these other issues. We anticipate this is going to take months, at least, you know, to come up to a point where staff is comfortable recommending to the Planning Commission a specific solution. I think we need on a policy level for you all to understand what we're talking about, where we might be going, have an opportunity to put some questions together for staff so they can present them to us and then send them off to work with us on how this might work. I appreciate Peter being with us and quiet both for the evening, but you know, I anticipate the two of us are going to work quite a bit together on all of the questions. I'm sorry, as a council member, Commissioner Young is raising. Definitely, I'm guessing she has a longer list than she's presented so far, and hopefully we'll address all of those soon. They're all very important questions, all things we've given a lot of thought to. But again, we didn't think it'd be fair to you to try to present answers to all those questions tonight. And honestly, I don't think we could have. I mean, I don't know that we have it all figured out yet either. But what we're asking for, and hope you'll grant us, is an opportunity to work with your staff to address some of these questions and figure out what's the most sensible way of going forward with this. And I'll say, I don't know how much of a poker face I have, but I myself cringe when Gabriel uses the word NIMBY, but I think that we understand residents and all of you will have very specific concerns about how this is going to impact everybody's life. And we have those same concerns for the potential residents of this settlement. We want them to be welcomed in the community and seen as a part of the community. And we need to have a lot more discussion about how that's going to actually be achieved on a technical level, from things like what are we going to do to keep these things from blowing away, and how are we going to keep people from getting frostbite on the way to the bathroom in January, to the social issues about how they're going to be integrated into the community. And hopefully we'll get to all of that relatively soon, but certainly not tonight. So thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate the goal of having high-level conversation. I think as problem solvers, we automatically start to think about what are some of the hurdles that need to be jumped over, and certainly you all have given us a lot of thought. I just want to be transparent in my thoughts of some of my, primary concerns on how this, because this is both it's a project level conversation, then it's also a citywide conversation, depending ultimately on how it's crafted. And so, I appreciate the project level conversation tonight, but we have to also be thinking about what does that mean for the rest of the community and things that aren't even related to the settled project. It's what other avenues might that open up, and is that our intent? So it's certainly going to be a journey. In essence of time, we're a little bit before 9 o'clock. I know Council and Planning Commission members have been at this since about 5:30, so it's been a long evening. Does anybody have any wrap-up questions that are burning and you're going to feel unfulfilled if we don't answer them tonight? This is step one. The goal tonight was to get the project out, to get some initial questions out there. Any other questions that we can entertain at this time?
Mara,
Councilmember Husnick, please.
Yeah, my question is going to be for the fire chief, because that's the one thing we haven't really talked too much about. Kind of clustering these buildings in close together and putting 18 of them in an area where you normally have 1 or 2 houses and that kind of thing. So I had a whole list of questions, and most of them were were answered tonight or asked by someone else. And so the two things for me is a zoning, and I agree with Susan, and we have to come up with something that's going to work there without creating another issue somewhere else. And of course, now the health, safety, and welfare, and the fire code and all that. So that's all I have for right now.
That's very good. Thank you. We don't have Chief Newman on. We don't have Chief Newman on this call, but you'll certainly be engaged on future conversations.
I don't know if I mean, it may just be that he's raising the question, but I did look at this, and we have fire and ambulance access to all the units, and actually you can get an ambulance as closer than 30 feet to the front door of the furthest tiny home, which is, you know, if there was an accident in somebody's swimming pool in their backyard, it's a lot further than 30 feet to get to the swimming pool. So, you know, we've looked at that and addressed those issues in terms of turning radius and access and so forth.
Well, I appreciate that, and but those things that need to be asked, and as we get deeper into this thing,
yeah,
well, it'll be easier to visualize it, I think, and so thanks.
Absolutely.
Hey, any recommendations just on behalf? Can I ask a question real quick, Mara?
You sure can, and then go ahead.
Just any recommendations that you have for us as a church, especially communications, things that we should be articulating outwardly just to get in front of this for folks?
I guess so I'll jump in here with my perspective. Anytime there's a change of this nature, people have a lot of questions, and however you are able to continue to get information out there and engage the community, I think is always a good thing. People are incredibly visual, as you know, and so having, is it Little Peach? Is that having the home back here in Forest Lake and have a workshop session, I would, welcome the opportunity to make that an official city, session where we've, noticed it as a public meeting, and we invite, council members and planning commission members to be part of that. I think is a good next step as kind of community engagement, as folks will certainly have questions. And as this conversation has shown, there's a lot of interesting questions that come up.
And I'm going to add that I know that within your faith community and within the faith communities that you have been talking to, this is perceived as a very good thing. But there is a reason that Forest Lake is now engaged in the We All Belong conversations. And it is because of long-standing issues in this community in which those who are perceived as other are strongly not welcomed. So I just want y'all to make sure that maybe join us in the We All Belong conversations, but be aware that this community does have some challenges.
Chair Langness.
I don't want this to come across as I have overt concerns about this specific project or anything along those lines, but when Mayor Bain and Vice Chairman Young were discussing the density in relation to a zoning text change, the concern that I've had in thinking about that process going forward is really, is our city infrastructure capable of sustaining that type of change? And I suspect at Faith Lutheran specifically, the sewers in the area and the water in the area probably is sufficient to hold 18 homes. But if we change our zoning such that a church in a relatively rural, more southeastern part of our city in the country, does it have sustainable enough infrastructure underground to hold those capacities And so one thing that would be helpful for me, and I don't expect this to be answered tonight at all, but if the conversation goes more towards a zoning alteration than it does a PUD or a conditional use permit or an interim use permit or something along those lines that's more specific to property, having a broad understanding of what the maximum capacity of that zoning change is to all of the properties that it potentially would affect in our city, because our city, for those that might be less familiar, does have the more urban area, but the rest of our city, most of the infrastructure underground, it's at capacity for single family homes. And, you know, we're not, I think, in any position to start building expanded sewer lines underneath our lake. And some of the really expensive pieces that we have outlined in our, and I mean, Susan might go back even further than me, but our 2030 and now our 2040 comprehensive plans, and we have extensive discussions in that. And I want to make sure that we're not hindering those pieces as we kind of move forward in this process. So thank you, Mayor Bain.
Thank you. Any other questions this evening? I guess I would, so thank you all for being here. I would invite the Faith and Settled project team. Any closing words you'd like to share with us tonight?
Well, no one else speaking, I'll just say thank you very much, really, for having us. And I'll repeat what I said earlier. I am extremely grateful that we've gotten into this level of detail at this first meeting, because, again, we completely anticipate we're going to have to address all of these issues. And obviously, we'll commit to do that. And it's really gratifying that you're taking us seriously enough to get into this level of detail at this first meeting. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I'll just
Very
echo
good.
a big gratitude for just being kind of open to something that, you know, it's been done in different pieces and different ways across the nation, but what we're presenting to you is really innovative. All of these pieces have never all come together like this. And so obviously we have a bunch of passion and believe that this is great, but you know, you're just getting these 2 hours of information, and you know, we're not, so I'm just, we are willing to answer all the questions, and you are just welcome to kind of reach out to us if you just can't sleep and there's just this pressing question or that sort of thing. And yeah, it's a conversation, and we want to do it together. We want it to be something that you're proud of in your city, and that makes sense for your city. And so obviously Faith Lutheran knows a ton about Forest Lake, but as Settled, we're still learning, and we want to learn, and we want to make this something that is representative of your community. So we are just as much here to listen and learn as we are to answer questions. So thank you.
Very good. Well, thank you for being here this evening, and thank you for being passionate about this important work. And we look forward to the next conversation. Planning Commission members and members of the City Council, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. And remember, just a quick reminder that we do need to do a roll call vote to adjourn because we are in a remote meeting. So if you'll all hang on for that. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
moved.
I think we're okay. I think we've got a motion to adjourn from Commissioner Young and
I'll second.
Second. Okay, we've got a second from Chair Langness. And Karen, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Gerard.
Aye.
Commissioner Batty.
Aye.
Commissioner Miller.
Aye.
Commissioner Keen.
Aye.
Chair Langness.
Sorry. Aye.
Councilmember Husnick,
Aye.
Councilmember Munson. Commissioner Young,
Aye.
Commissioner Brink,
Aye.
Mayor Bain.
Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.